Welcome to the Prophecy Club. We are going to do a series because I think it's important that we all understand that these hurricanes, while they probably are the hand of God, they probably are the judgment. As you recall, Dimitri was told that God is going to send all kinds of hurricanes and floods and storms to weaken us, to show us his hand. Okay, so okay, I understand. They probably are the judgment of God. But we also have to understand that the hand that God might be using to bring that judgment may very well be the hand of the Russians. Again, I can't guarantee it's them, using scalar wave. And I can't guarantee it's scalar wave. However, I want us all to understand what scalar wave can do. So here's what we're doing. I'm going to be playing the audio of two of what I consider to be the best, most informative DVDs out there anyplace, specifically talking about scalar wave. Now, the first one is called Russia's Secret Weapons to Defeat America by Bill Snebel. Let me briefly tell you about this. Bill reveals technology that the Russians have that can knock out anything on the land, on the sea, under the sea, any place on the globe with little to no trace of it. It can make large areas of the atmosphere super hot, as in tornadoes, hurricanes, or super cold, as in snow and ice storms. And the other one is Weapons of the New World Order by Nick Begich. This one also discusses the same thing with additional information on HAARP, also how it's used in military applications, and how it can also be used to basically put an umbrella over the entire nation of Russia and any of our planes or our missiles that we might throw at Russia. It could defeat them all, like big umbrella over the whole nation. Each DVD is valued at $30. This week, we're making both of them available in the Scalar Wave gift offer for a gift of just $30. Both DVDs for a gift of $30. prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112. The Scalar Wave gift offer. Now let's go listen to Weapons of the New World Order by Nick Begich.
And then also out of a publication from one of the Russian Army leading journals called Orienteer. And I'll just read a couple of these just to give you a sort of a flavor for what I'm talking about. A psychotronic generator which produces a powerful electromagnetic emanation capable of being sent through telephone lines, TV, radio networks, supply pipes, and incandescent lamps. This signal would manipulate the behavior of those in contact with the signal. Another one. A nervous system generator which is designed to paralyze the central nervous system of insects. The same system is being refined to have the same effect on human beings. Another one, and this one's kind of interesting. Ultrasonic signals of very specific design have been created. These devices are supposedly capable of carrying out bloodless internal operations without leaving a mark on the skin. And they can also be used to kill. And another one, and this is a real interesting one, the 25th frame effect is a technique where every 25th frame of a movie reel or video footage contains a message that is picked up by the subconscious so as to alter the conscious mind. That same 25th frame effect can be instilled through computer networks and delivered via the internet. Now, you're worrying about pornography? Good thing to worry about. Worry about some of the other technologies in terms of that carrier. Because when you think about the internet as an unregulated, unfiltered source of information, the 25th frame effect, this idea of carrying signals on internet transmissions, is very, very possible. Technology exists to do it, and we cite a number of patents that point that out quite clearly. In terms of radio, like radio broadcasts that you hear, back during the Gulf War, we suspected for a long time that something else was going on there beyond the conventional weaponry. And the thing is, as our sort of rule of thumb, in fact it is our rule of thumb, if you can't prove it and you can't produce documents to prove it, you just don't say it. Because there's plenty out there. If there's 100 items in the plate and 80 of them you can prove, stick to the 80. The other 20, either time will prove are not correct or time will give you the information that evidences them. And this is very important because when we go out and we talk about this, we need to be equipped to deliver that source material. The people we tell need to be equipped, so when they're challenged by people with more technical backgrounds or scientific backgrounds or political backgrounds, that they can point authoritatively to those sources and say, it's not my words, it's your words, and point to those military records, point to those U.S. patents, point to those academic studies that lay out that case. because I think that's equipping people properly. And it also serves to dissipate a lot of the fear when you replace fear with real knowledge, and then you act on that knowledge in a responsible way. That's a very important thing, because fear, I think, really comes from the wrong place. You know, I mean, it's not a matter of generating fear, it's a matter of generating hope. I mean, the purpose of prophecy is to warn us. It's not to condemn us, it's to warn us about what might be coming, but at the same time, to sort of say, look, if, you know, you change your behavior, you change what you're doing, maybe the time won't come tomorrow, maybe it'll be put off. And I can say that, you know, I think pretty confidently that for the last 2,000 years, people have been saying, this is it, it's all over. And we're still here 2,000 years later. Maybe this is it, maybe it is all over, but the fact of the matter is, we're not called to hide in a hole, we're called to step out and act on what we know to be right and true. The other thing that's important, when we talk about mind control technologies, when you talk about something that's influencing behavior, that's one thing, and that's certainly interfering with free will. But let's take it another step. And an important part of this is it relates to the HAARP activity. And I've got to tell you this story. This is a great story. People always underestimate, you know, what our own potentials are. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. Somebody heard us on the radio one time, heard what we were saying, got hold of one of our books, read it, and sent it to a friend of theirs. Well, their friend turned out to be the chairman of the environmental subcommittee of the European Parliament. And he read it, and he went, you know, this sounds pretty bizarre to me, and kind of reacted like I reacted the first time, but he did what I did. He went and checked it out, checked with a scientist, went to his military. This guy, Tom Spencer, goes to his military in Great Britain. He was a conservative from Great Britain. And he says, what's the story on this HAARP project? And they said, look, you really don't want to get involved in this. You know, stay out of it. It's, you know, you just don't want to go there. And for Tom Spencer, that was the ticket to the dance. You know, that was his invitation to get engaged. So he dug around. We went over and saw him. In fact, we made 4 or 5 visits to him. And then at one point, and that's too long of a story to tell, at one point we ended up on a ship together for 12 days. And in that time, we sort of laid out a plan of how do we take this information into a political body so that we can address it. And more than that, beyond HAARP, we wanted to deal with these other weapon technologies, which we felt were even more dangerous and more invasive, things that can influence our very behavior. As a result, he invited us, well, I got to go back a little bit. In the course of all of this, he got a new assignment. He became the Foreign Affairs Chairman, which is a very powerful position in the European Parliament. And so he decided that he would have a hearing in one of his subcommittees to address HAARP and broaden the agenda to include non-lethal weapons, such as the things we've been talking about so far today. And in that, he invited NATO. He went to the Secretary General of NATO. Now, this is the same committee that NATO went to when they wanted to introduce new member states to NATO. So they were a very important committee when NATO needed them. Now they go to the Secretary General and say, well, we'd like you to produce somebody to talk about ionospheric modification for weapons application, the stuff of HAARP, and we'd like you to talk about non-lethal weapons, the stuff of mind control and the like. And NATO says, we don't have a policy on either, and we're not going to appear. So Tom doesn't stop there because he's a very persistent guy. He goes to the American mission, our embassy in Brussels, and says, look, we want you to produce somebody to talk about your project, HAARP, and these other issues. And they wouldn't produce anyone. So he brought me in. He brought in someone from the International Red Cross, someone from Canada who is a physicist and an MD. In fact, this woman, Rosalie Bertel, was also a nun, and I don't know which order she was in. So, you know, kind of a strange combination. You had a physicist, an MD, and a nun all in one body. And she was really good, and she was also the lead physician to investigate Bhopal after that huge event happened out there. So a very credible person. And then he brought in also someone from a group called GRIP, which was a group that deals with weapon systems based in Brussels. And what we did, and this is kind of interesting, the Europeans have a little different way of doing things. You know, we had delivered over those several visits hundreds and hundreds of documents, about 3 feet of documents we had delivered to the Europeans. And these are our allies, basically. So they had a lot of background material, they had a lot of information, and they were so incensed that the military would not show up, that NATO wouldn't show up, and the U.S. wouldn't produce anyone. They really wanted to have a good, solid hearing, and they were going to have it anyway. And so we met the night before. They shut down a restaurant, put us in there, 2 people from the media that they trusted, the committee members, and myself, and we went through our evidence for 5.5 hours. So they would be able to frame their questions in the public record the next day adequately to bring this issue out. So we went in, and the first thing we presented was a NATO document from NATO France on ionospheric modification for weapons application, the thing they didn't have any policy about, right? The other thing we brought in was something from the Strategic Studies Institute showing where NATO had deployed non-lethal weapons in events and conflicts in Europe. So we take in their own documents, essentially. The Strategic Studies Institute is independent, but they're considered one of the most credible in the world. And their document from NATO France, one of the lead guys credited in that, was also attached to the HAARP program. So the idea that they didn't have a policy, we said, look, if they don't have a policy on these things, then what are they doing deploying these systems and experimenting with them? It seems pretty reckless to us. Well, instead of the 15 minutes we were supposed to have, I had an hour and a half to present our case. The other thing we did as part of our presentation is we demonstrated an infrasound device. Now, this is a device, and I'll explain how this works, because it's going to get right into the next phase of this thing. An infrasound device is a device that converts sound information into a carrier that can transfer through the nervous system and arrive at the brain in the same way that a sound wave normally would. But this is the difference. A sound wave hits the outer ear, and this is your antenna array, this ear. If you close your eyes and someone jingles keys and walks around the room, within a few degrees you can isolate, where they are. But if you distort this and try it, you won't be able to isolate where they are, because this is what's catching that first sound wave, is giving some direction. Then hits the eardrum, vibrates the eardrum slightly. There's 3 small bones in the inner ear. Those get vibrated slightly. There's a little bit of fluid that vibrates, and then it hits what's called the 8th cranial nerve. And what goes through the 8th cranial nerve is a little electrical signal that's digitized by that point because of all this activity on the outer ear. And that digital signal arrives at the brain through that nerve. The brain, they believe now, operates holographically. It picks out that code, that modulation, that little package of information, and you perceive sound. My voice, for instance, that you're hearing now. Now, if you can duplicate that modulation, that little package of information, and carry it in another way...
We'll be right back after this message. Well, the truth is, almost no people on earth agree on all points of the Bible. But if you listen to the Prophecy Club, the Spirit of Prophecy Church might be just right for you. Our 2 most controversial beliefs are speaking in tongues and post-trib. But you might have to attend a long time to see anybody speaking in tongues, and we don't really make post-trib a big deal. But our 2 only sticking points are Jesus is Lord and the King James Bible. So if you're not attending a church, or if you're maybe looking for a new or a different church home, especially if you like to listen to the Prophecy Club, Spirit of Prophecy Church might be a fit. Most of our congregation found us via Prophecy Club, and many actually drive long distances to attend. We suggest you visit at least 5 times before making your decision, and if you walk in Sunday morning about 10:15, you walk into coffee and donuts. You're free to leave anytime, no questions asked. So, if you listen to Prophecy Club, give us a try. Spirit of Prophecy Church, 2540 K Avenue in Plano. That's on the corner of Park and K, like the margarine, right behind the Whataburger. Spirit of Prophecy Church, 2540 K Avenue, Plano, Sunday, 10:15. Ask for Stan. The number 1 killer in most emergency events, surprisingly, is drinking contaminated water. Being able to scoop water out of the puddle and filter it may save your life. I drink all of my water filtered through a Crown Berkey. Now, it's a gravity filter filtering down to virus levels. Contaminated water in the top gives you drinking water out the bottom. It's what the missionaries use. There are 7 Berkey options from 1 to 8 filters. Order them at prophecyclub.com. Be sure and order 2 to 4 extra black filters as backup. That's prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112. Berkey water filters. And now, back to the program.
Now, if you can duplicate that modulation, that little package of information, and carry it in another way, and connect it to the nervous system, you'll hear the sound too, but it won't have any directional orientation. Now, the device we took did this. It used a piezoelectric transducer, which is a little disc that fits on the skin. It connects up, couples to the nervous system, and actually transfers the signal. So you can completely block your outer ears, and what you hear is a signal as if it were originating in the center of your head, inside your cranium. so that that's where the sound originated, and you would be hearing my voice just as clear as you're hearing it now. Now, when we demonstrated this in infrasound devices, we're sort of in the literature, but these guys had never seen one. This was built out of stuff off the shelf, literally from a Radio Shack, and demonstrated that this capability existed. And the patent it was based on goes back to 1958. Now, when we showed them that got us this really important resolution passed, because we wanted to get the stuff in on HAARP, and they gave us that. But then the main thing we wanted to make sure we had something that would stretch it into these more important, from our perspective, very much more important technologies. And this is what that portion of the resolution says. It calls for an international convention introducing a global ban on all developments and deployments of weapons which might enable any form of manipulation of human beings, unquote. Very important, in the sense that here's a political body that finally recognized technology exists. And when you think about how do countries get influenced, how do organizations get influenced, rule one, you preempt the leadership. You take out the leadership, right? I mean, if you want to stop a movement, you go after the people at the top, and everything sort of falls away. Well, when parliamentarians sort of think about, what would be the effect of this system on me, I mean, ask yourself, if one of your favorite parliamentarians or legislators stood up and started talking about hearing voices in their head, sayonara, you're out of here. You wouldn't tolerate it. They'd be gone, right? At the same time, if they didn't say anything and they just were experiencing it, wouldn't it be highly disturbing? In fact, I want to go to a military document. It's New World Vistas Air and Space for the 21st Century. And it's put out by the Scientific Advisory Board to the Air Force. And if I can quickly find the quote, I'll read it, because it really lays out sort of another angle to this discussion that I think is quite compelling. If I'm fortunate enough to find it when I need it. Yeah, here it is. Again, this is an Air Force document, and this is the quote. It would also appear possible to create high-fidelity speech in the human body, raising the possibility of covert suggestion and psychological direction. Thus, it may be possible to talk to selected adversaries in a fashion which would be most disturbing to them, unquote. Now, wouldn't that be most disturbing if you were walking around and all of a sudden you got that voice in the head? And what's interesting is I was on a program, it was called Undercurrents. It's on CBC, Canadian Broadcasting System, one of their highest rated shows in Canada. That's their public broadcaster. And we did a special with a number of experts on mind control. And one of the experts was a guy named Smirnov, who works in the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he demonstrated this very same technology, utilizing a medium that could be easily pushed through the internet. And what he said was that when you hear this, it's like hearing the voice of God. It cannot be resisted. Now, why is that? It's because it bypasses the conscious portion of the brain that filters out right and wrong, good and evil, lines things up with our experience, sort of dumps it straight into the brain where you begin to act on it. You're compelled to act on it. Now, Smirnov wasn't alone in that presentation. The other people that talked about this was a couple, I forget their first names, the Morrises. Now, they worked with a guy named D. Klein and a guy named John Alexander during the Bush-Reagan era, and evolved this whole concept of non-lethals. Now, they couldn't talk about what they did in the United States, but they had a chance to test this little device when they were on a trip to Moscow, and they testified in this tape and in a number of other sources that are quoted within the book about their experience that, in fact, it really does work, that you literally cannot resist it. And the way it was demonstrated for them was they ran it through the building that they were in, and what they told everyone to do was to bring at an appointed time little cakes, down to this office. Now, when you drink coffee or tea in Russia, it usually goes with little cakes. So at the appointed time, all these people from all over the place show up at the little cakes, as a demonstration. Well, the interesting part of all of it is that the idea of transferring voice information in this way is quite compelling. More than that, it goes even further, because what we used, you had to have a physical connection. What we know is that through microwaves or other carriers, you can carry that same signal in. If we had had a little more time and maybe 20 or 30,000 to play with that, we could have demonstrated that as well. And someday we probably will, because it's very compelling when you can show someone how it really works. It changes the whole perspective. And when you think about hierarchical structures, organizations, they tend to be, you take out the top and everything falls apart. The thing the military fears the most, the thing that most disturbs them in terms of outcomes is what's called a leaderless revolution. And this is really sort of the subhead of all of this. What is a leaderless revolution? It's one without a head and one without a tail. You can't really stop it. It's when spontaneously a block of people get the same spiritual inclination and begin moving a certain direction and things start changing. Like what we couldn't do in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries in 40 years. All of a sudden, everybody kind of was in the streets. It was relatively nonviolent. It wasn't a violent thing. There wasn't any leadership to throw in jail. And what happened? What we couldn't do in 40 years, the whole thing collapsed in a matter of weeks and months. And because leaderless revolution, couldn't isolate the leadership and get them out of circulation. The other thing that's important is what actually happened in that instance, or the instances in the Philippines when Marcos went down. The same kind of thing occurred. All of a sudden, spontaneously, people acted. Because they did a very simple thing. Faith, when I was growing up, and I can tell you, my route to become a Christian was not an easy trail. Because the way my mind works, the way I think, wasn't an easy trail. It's too long to explain here, but I can tell you, it was a tough one, all right? Because I had to have proofs and evidence and all this stuff, because that's my nature. But the point is, what was the sort of the break point? I was raised originally a Catholic, and at the point of confirmation, this is where you're supposed to know that you know. Well, I didn't know, and I told the priest I didn't know at that point in my life, and I wasn't going to do it. And there aren't a lot of Catholics that do that, They kind of say, wait a minute, I don't want to do this because I'm not going to lie to myself, first of all, and then lie to you, second of all. And that was where I was at 12 years old. But what that priest told me that was interesting, he said, he tried to get in this long discussion about what faith was, which was really confused the heck out of me. Because for me, what I have learned is faith is a very simple thing. It's not a very complex thing. Faith is acting on what you know to be right and true and stepping into it. Sitting on the bench, warm in the pew, with no action, nothing is happening there. Faith is demonstrated by stepping into the game and doing something about what you know to be right and true. And not with a lot of anxiety and tension and all that, because God doesn't give us things that we can't handle. It's with pure confidence that you know that by making that step in that direction, that you'll get what you need to do what you need to do in terms of your work. Whether it's something as complicated as what this all might appear to be, or something quite simple. And there's a human butterfly effect. That butterfly effect, a little bit of energy in, huge things out. You never know what it's going to do. You might be walking down the street someday, and it may be as simple as smiling at the guy walking the other direction, and that simple thing might actually change that individual's life. Maybe they didn't think anybody cared about them, and maybe that little simple thing could have that profound effect. And I believe that. And I'll give you another example. Remember that person heard us on the radio, decided to do something with the information, stepped into the game, and look what came out of it. Tremendous thing. I never would have expected. Somebody told me I'd be standing here today and have followed the trail I followed in the last 7 years. I'd have said, you're out of your mind, because it just doesn't look that way when you start down that trail. But every time you take one of those steps, eventually you look back behind you, there's a whole trail, and you go, wow, I couldn't have mapped that one out any better if I had tried. And you didn't. And I think that's it. It's a step of faith. The faith of a mustard seed, a real small thing, creates a real big thing. It's the same idea here. You got to do something. You got to act some action to it, and recognize where that real truth lies. Along that line, when we look back, there's a couple other things that are kind of other examples of it. There was a guy that wrote me from Germany. He worked in a mail room, a mail room in the bottom of a big business. And he wrote me a letter and he said, I really liked your book because he saw it, he read it in the Munich library. He goes, what can I do to help you? And I said, I really need a German publisher because Germans are real important for these issues in Europe. So this guy thinks about who's the best publisher in Germany for our book. Now he takes up his copy, which was kind of marked up sort of like mine, and chases somebody, figures out who it is in this bureaucracy and sends his copy of the book over. And follows up with a phone call. Chases the guy down and says, will you read it at least? And he goes, yeah, I'll read it in the next couple of months. I'll get back to you. 3 days later, the guy called me. 5 days later, we had an agreement. The next day after the agreement, he had 5 translators on the book and an MD, and it was in print and available in Germany 3 months later. Which anyone who knows anything about publishing, that's a phenomenal pace to translate a technical title. The same thing happened. We wanted Japan. You get Germany, Japan, and the U.S. You really kind of cover big chunks of what happens to influence policy. In Japan, it was interesting. There's a guy, he's a mortician in California, read our book. Send it to somebody he knew. Same thing happened. We ended up with our book in Japanese. I can give you dozens of examples like that because we always underestimate what we're all capable of. It takes a step. May not be this issue. Might be something else. Everyone in this room has something near and dear to your heart that requires some little bit of action. And in doing so, tremendous things can become possible. In looking at sort of where does it go from there, one of the other things that shows up in New World Vistas Air and Space for the 21st century is sort of the ultimate on where mind technologies may someday go and may very shortly go, is the idea of being able to remove a memory and give you a new one, a synthetic memory. Now, from a military perspective, this would be great for training, right? Instead of learning all this stuff for weeks and months, it'd be nice to just download that information. We are not that far off. The problem there is, from my perspective, it may sound real interesting. I mean, what if you could learn a foreign language in a few hours? That might be kind of exciting. Here's something to think about. And I don't know whether Stan mentioned it when he introduced me, but I also was past president of the Alaska Federation of Teachers for 2 terms and the Anchorage Council of Education for 2 terms, teachers' organizations. I'm the only teachers' organization president that I know about that ever served in that capacity that favors vouchers. Now, why would I favor vouchers? Because I'm smart enough to know that what the public system is doing, what the state does to download into our kids with the current curriculum is somewhat damaging, severely damaging in some cases. But the idea that the state knows better than the parent, I have a real hard problem with. But the other aspect of it is military technology eventually translates into private sector. Now think about this as an educational tool. Who will control the curriculum if this type of technology migrates into the private sector? Who will decide for that first 16 years where children are required to be educated, and most people can't afford private education or homeschooling, they can't do it because they're working 3 jobs to make 1 living already. Who's going to control the curriculum that goes into kids' heads? Bearing in mind that when you dump information in utilizing these tools, you bypass the conscious filter, what's right and wrong. So what you establish is the moral base under which the country operates. Very dangerous technology. We cannot wait until it's here.
Well, we've run out of time today. I'm going to have to interrupt right there, but I encourage you to get these 2 DVDs to understand about these storms like Harvey and Irma and how scalar wave very well could be hitting us. In other words, this could be the Russians, via the hand of God, hitting America. The first one, Russia's Secret Weapons to Defeat America by Bill Sniblin, defines how scalar wave works. Weapons of the New World Order explains how it works from a military standpoint to be able to knock out missiles, attacking airplanes, basically to defeat the mutually assured destruction that Russia and America has operated on since World War II. Each DVD valued at $30. We're making both of them available this week for a gift of just $30 in the Scalar Wave gift offer. prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112. The Scalar Wave gift offer, 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. I'm the next speaker at the Prophecy Club. I memorized the book of Revelation, and in the process, God gave me 12 awesome revelations. Jesus is not the primary message of Revelation. What is? My biggest revelation, what is the morning star? Who are the 2 witnesses? The final answer to the rapture question. Definitive proof that America is in Revelation. And what is America's future? 7 signs to spot the Antichrist early. When does the New Jerusalem arrive? Are there 1 or 2 judgments? The surprising final plague on earth. October 14th and 15th, Saturday evening, 7 p.m., Sunday morning, 9 a.m. at the Prophecy Club, 2540 K Avenue in Plano. That's October 14 and 15, Saturday evening, 7 p.m., Sunday morning, 9 a.m., Spirit of Prophecy Church, corner of Park and K in Plano. No charge. It's on Revelations on Revelation. See you there. Order your copy of the DVD at prophecyclub.com.